Let's start with a brief summary. This article, written by Paul Graham in 2002, shares his personal views on object-oriented programming. Graham acknowledges that object-oriented programming can be beneficial in some situations, but rejects the idea that every program should be object-oriented. He points out various reasons for the popularity of object-oriented programming and summarizes these reasons in 5 points. Based on his own experiences, Graham states that he generally does not need object-oriented programming techniques and instead resorts to different techniques. Before we dive in, I want to share a quick note about how this podcast is created. As you've probably noticed, this podcast isn't voiced by a human, but by artificial intelligence. I'm obligated to inform you of this beforehand due to the rules of AI services. This podcast is made possible by our sponsor, Wope.com, an AI startup that combines content marketing with artificial intelligence to significantly boost traffic and revenue of your startups. For all the latest content, be sure to follow me at x.com/yigitkoner. Now let's turn our attention back to the essay. And hashed. Why Arc programming language doesn't particularly rely on object-oriented programming. Original title: Why Arc isn't especially object-oriented. Date: February 2002. There's a kind of mania for object-oriented programming at the moment, but the smartest programmers, reesoo.html, I know are some of the least excited about it. My own feeling is that object-oriented programming is a useful technique in some cases, but it isn't something that has to pervade every program you write. You should be able to define new types, but you shouldn't have to express every program as the definition of new types. I think there are 5 reasons people like object-oriented programming, and 3.5 of them are bad. 1. Object-oriented programming is exciting if you have a statically typed language without lexical closures or macros. To some degree, it offers a way around these limitations. See Greenspun's 10th rule, quotes.html. 2. Object-oriented programming is popular in big companies because it suits the way they write software. At big companies, software tends to be written by large and frequently changing teams of mediocre programmers. Object-oriented programming imposes a discipline on these programmers that prevents any one of them from doing too much damage. The price is that the resulting code is bloated with protocols and full of duplication. This is not too high a price for big companies, because their software is probably going to be bloated and full of duplication anyway. 3. Object-oriented programming generates a lot of what looks like work. Back in the days of fanfold, there was a type of programmer who would only put 5 or 10 lines of code on a page, preceded by 20 lines of elaborately formatted comments. Object-oriented programming is like crack for these people. It lets you incorporate all this scaffolding right into your source code. Something that a Lisp hacker might handle by pushing a symbol onto a list becomes a whole file of classes and methods. So it's a good tool if you want to convince yourself or someone else that you are doing a lot of work. 4. If a language is itself an object-oriented program, it can be extended by users. Well, maybe. Or maybe you can do even better by offering the sub-concepts of object-oriented programming a la carte. Overloading, for example, is not intrinsically tied to classes. We'll see. 5. Object-oriented abstractions map neatly onto the domains of certain specific kinds of programs, like simulations and CAD systems. I personally have never needed object-oriented abstractions. Common Lisp has an enormously powerful object system, and I've never used it once. I've done a lot of things, e.g. making hash tables full of closures, that would have required object-oriented techniques to do in wimpier languages, but I have never had to use class. Maybe I'm just stupid, or have worked on some limited subset of applications. There is a danger in designing a language based on one's own experience of programming, but it seems more dangerous to put stuff in that you've never needed because it's thought to be a good idea.